I wonder if there's like a hubris or an arrogance there where they can't possibly accept that some stupid bodybuilder figured it all out and now they're arriving at the same thing and accepting that it just worked and bodybuilders had it figured out. And they can only speak about it publicly if they can reference a research paper.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barber, and with me is Brad Pilon. And we had a conversation going that we figured should be a good podcast. And it's all of these talking heads you can find on social media that are highly credentialed, highly educated people, PhDs, MDs. Some of them have both. And they obviously know their way around whatever physiology or biology stuff that they study.
Yeah.
But it seems as though it's somewhere in the middle of their life. They just discover weight training and they just discover the idea of maybe losing some body fat. You might look better. And they get on, they seem to get on a roll where they're really into it, but they sound like how we sounded in high school when we first lifted a weight. Yeah. And I don't know. It just seems like you should have known this. Like, how are you only getting to this?
It's like a weird generation gap. So when I was in high school, and so in Canada, we used to have 5 years of high school. And that last year, you typically are like a peer mentor. So I was helping out in a first year grade 9 art class. And so I was drawing a picture of Yoda, right? And remember, this is before the prequels came out and the Clone Wars and all that kind of stuff. And a couple of the kids in the class were like, is that a gremlin? I was like, wait, dude, I'm a good artist. It's obviously Yoda, right? And I'm like, oh, dude, guys, it's Yoda. And they're like, who? I mean, how do you not know who Yoda is? Now that's changed since everything has come back around. But I feel like this is just a generation that came up to just miss the muscle mag era, the muscle media 2000 era, and they're just discovering, guys, like creatine really works. And you're sitting there going, oh my God. But they're like, you should be eating a lot more protein. You should be lifting weights. You should be getting a good amount of sleep at night. And hey, if you're feeling a bit down, apparently if you take some caffeine before your workout, it kind of boosts you up. Like they're rediscovering everything that bodybuilding was in the sort of original form. But what I find crazy about that is they also spend a fair amount of time ripping on not just bodybuilding, but cultures like bodybuilding, only to come around later on and be like, oh yeah, they got most of it. They got most of that right. And it's just to your point, just fascinating watching the talking heads kind of catch up, but act like they're discovering it.
Yeah. And it keeps happening. And I keep thinking to myself, do they really not know this? Like, when was the first time any of these people lifted weights? And then I started realizing, they probably they weren't focused on this. They're focused on something else.
Yeah.
But since they're really highly credentialed, when they go online and start talking about it, I think they think people trust their opinion, but they don't actually look like anything. Many of them. There's a few that I can think of. There's a few I can think of, like Huberman looks the part too. But a lot, a lot of them they just don't look like anybody's ever lifted a weight or actually ever gotten any kind of shape that you'd ever take a picture of.
But funnily, geez. But on that point, guys who are really built, right? If Ronnie Coleman or one of those guys, C-Bum would be the new guy, or Sam Suluk would be like, hey guys, you should be taking creatine. People just roll their eyes because if you're too big, people just assume you're dumb, and they just steroids, right? They just throw a blanket out there. So I don't know if that's why these people have been ignored in everything they've been saying and doing, or if you just think, I don't know, everything they being the bodybuilders have said for decades kind of just gets thrown out as unscientific, only to come back around and be scientific a decade or two later. Just, it's odd that we can't take that sort of anecdotal evidence, that real world evidence, and be like, something's going on here. Whatever they're doing is obviously working. And don't just say steroids, because I feel like every single fitness influencer is on steroids and doesn't look the way a lot of those guys did, right? So you should be looking at people getting great results and being like, I wonder what they're doing, as opposed to just rediscovering it decades later because the paper told you so.
Right. And I think that's the point. Bodybuilders,
they're not
fitness competitors from decades and decades ago. And we had a whole podcast about this. They had it all figured out in the 70s. Yes, they used steroids, but That doesn't get you anywhere if you don't exercise and still diet. Like
And
steroids
so
don't
does
take
everybody, right? Like it's
Yes,
so
yes.
ubiquitous now that yeah.
Like the difference with steroids is you can if you're going to use that as an excuse, is why would you ever listen to a bodybuilder? Well, you still need to eat like extra protein, and they could probably handle even more. You still need to do a calorie deficit to strip off fat.
Yes.
Like anabolics don't really take fat off. Maybe certain ones might help release some more fat.
Yep.
Like Anavar and Winstrol, I think actually stimulate more fat burning. But if you don't have a caloric deficit, nothing's going to happen. And if you don't go to the gym, also nothing's really going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just the drugs, the anabolics, make the result even bigger. But all the fundamental principles are the same. You got to work out as hard as you can. You've got to get into a caloric deficit to strip off body fat. You've got to eat more protein to service the needs of the muscle growing.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of it's the same. Drugs are not. All of that's like fundamentally identical.
I think people also forget the initial sort of era of bodybuilding, that late 60s in the early 70s. They were also competing with one another, right? So it couldn't just be I'm on steroids, John's on steroids. It's gonna be like, hey, I'm on steroids, John's on steroids. I need to figure out how to lift, eat, sleep better than John because I have to beat him on stage in a couple months. So the competition made for that innovation, right? And then because they didn't have, there wasn't a lot of funding and research in that sort of area at the time, they would basically at the end of it go like, okay, John destroyed Brad on stage. What was John doing? Because I'm doing that next year. And they would build off of that, standing on the shoulders of giants, so to say. And they, through trial and error, really came up with sort of what works. And then a bunch of big brain people came around in the 1990s and been like, well, they're all idiots. None of that works. And this is what you should be doing. And just sort of pushed everything to the wayside there. So we could sound smart. Right. And it was sort of, that was the era of we call it bro science condescendingly now, but that's what we did in the early 2000s to kind of establish the science of exercise physiology away from the bodybuilders. Right. We stole it through science. And then now when the bodybuilders use science back at us, we roll our eyes and call it bro science. But we just throw away all of that sort of experience-based learning. If one paper disagreed with what they were saying, and it would always be the same. It would be a bunch of bodybuilders being like, this is what I did. It worked really well. And then some being like, well, hey, this paper on 52-year-old diabetics says differently. So you're wrong. Right. And it would just, that would be it.
Right. And so I guess what this talk was, all of those so-called big brain people with all the credentials are now in the 2020s re-arriving at what the bodybuilders knew all along, because now there's a paper supporting it. There's a paper supporting 100 grams of protein. There's that you could eat all at once. There's a paper supporting, well, even more papers supporting creatine, just whatever it is, like the whatever it took to strip off fat that we always knew. Now there's papers supporting, how much muscle you can build. All of that stuff. We already knew it. There's no reason to wait around for a paper to find out that it worked. It's like, well, yeah, I did it. It worked. We knew that. And to Brad's point, the old following advice from old bodybuilders, they all normalized with the drugs they used. So that's actually, besides genetics, some people just had superior shape and superior genetics. Yeah. They were all hyper responders to whatever drug they were on. That's the only way you get to the point where
they're all on the same drug. Like, they didn't have peptides and stuff like that. It was whatever was available at the time was what they were taking, right? Like it was, yeah, they were all had the same access. Nobody had a secret drug that nobody else had. I mean, half of them, probably more than half of them, trained at the bloody same gym, right? So it was whatever that guy dealing with that gym had was what they were using, right? So,
and in the end, they all kind of look the same, like all the top guys. Same with the women too. They all sort of arrive at the same shape. So, and if they had slightly different training regimes, sure, but like all of them were going to do the same thing to get in shape for a show. Let's set aside diuretics at the very end for cutting water. Yeah. But to take fat off, they're all doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. They're all increasing cardio, increasing energy output as much as they can, decreasing calories to a level that they can handle.
Manage.
Yes. Yep. Yes, they're using stimulants, they're using whatever they can. There's a growth hormone era in there as well. But again, you still have to cut the calories. Yep. They just get a more extreme result than if you don't use the drugs. But in the end, they all are creating a deficit
And the
to
big
take the
back
fat
then, the
off.
big bulks weren't going on either. They were just eating as much as they needed to support their most of them, very long workouts, right? So again, they intuitively kind of had that down as well. It's like if I up my carbs, I make it through a 2.5 hour workout. But when I cut my carbs, I don't, right? Like they figure that stuff out. So everything we're kind of figuring out now, not figuring out, rediscovering is you could have learned just by not ignoring an entire population of people from the late 60s, early 70s. And they were right there with a lot of answers, but we just sort of threw it all out in the name of science and came right back around to it now. Like I'm waiting for they're going to start talking about, in order to really lean out towards the end of a diet, you should maybe consider some like really low steady state cardio. I would, maybe walking on a treadmill. Like they're going to come right back to just a complete bodybuilder style cut pretty soon. But act like it's brand new or have a new reason why it works. Right. So
I wonder if there's like a hubris or an arrogance there where they can't possibly accept that some stupid bodybuilder figured it all out and now they're arriving at the same thing and accepting that it just worked and bodybuilders had it figured out, and they can only speak about it publicly if they can reference a research paper.
Yeah. Oh, dude, it's mind blowing. Like I was just listening to a podcast the other day about this thing called the golden mean and how a guy's shoulder to waist ratio or a woman's waist to hip and shoulders ratio, not only is it a marker of attractiveness, but also as a really good marker of health. And I started going, you're not going to reference this at all. You're just going to talk about this as if you just discovered it.
Wait, hang on. You're not talking about us.
It's not talking about us at all. It was as if it was like their research on that air. And there was so many Adonis Venus like statements in there where I'm like, like John made that word up. That's not even a real word, right? Like, but it was just sort of in there. And so people I don't know what happened in the last 20 years, but like you'll reference a paper, but you'll never cite the original person you got the idea from to look into that paper. Like that sort of thing is kind of disappeared. So I think you're right. I don't think there's a lot of academics out there who are going to be, I was on YouTube and I was watching his videos, went down a rabbit hole, and Lee Haney was there. And Lee Haney's this old, Mr. Olympia, bunch of Mr. Olympias in a row. And he said a thing that made me think I should look into it. And I did, and it was right. Right? They'll just jump right to so I was reading a paper the other day from the established, Harvard Medical School. Like they skip where the idea came from. And that's I think it's very disingenuous. And it gives you that idea that all this information is new, and it's infuriating because then we're not really building on top of what we've known previously. We're kind of pretending like there was nothing below us, right? Like it's just, bam, brand new idea out of the ether.
Yeah, much of the body composition research that was done in the last 2-3 decades, the idea to even bother trying a particular trial or test was because bodybuilders are already doing it and getting success. Yeah. So let's just find out the mechanism.
Yeah. Every idea, whether it's a fashion trend or a fitness trend, it starts on the fringes and then it comes in, right? So if you were alive in the 1990s, it was your freak grunge kids in high school wearing plaid shirts first. And then 3 years later, every single person in the school was wearing plaid, right? Like everything always starts from the fringe, the haute couture fashion shows and comes in. And so bodybuilding was always that fringe. Now it's very mainstream, but it was the fringe at the time. And that's where trends then entered health and fitness like a decade later. They came in through there, right? Like the carrying around water bottles wasn't even a thing until bodybuilders started doing it, as far as I'm concerned. So that's where the trends come from. We just ignore that amazing source of information that we should probably all be studying.
Yeah, well, it's because it's results based. It's not theoretical. There's something going on when people get into that extreme condition. And I think the drug use clouds it.
Yeah.
Because you can so easily dismiss it. Oh, it's just drugs.
And the size of the individuals too, right? They got to the point where it was just a bit, people almost were like, well, that's too big. And therefore I'm going to ignore everything they're saying.
Yeah. But anyone who's been around, anyone who's gotten in contest shape knows that's a lot of work. Drugs or not, it's still a ton of work.
Yeah.
And the difference is when you're using drugs, like anabolics and stimulants or whatever, growth hormone things to strip off an extreme amount of fat and to build an extreme amount of muscle. You just end up in an even more extreme condition at the end. But all the same, like I said, all the same diet and exercise principles apply. And if you just took all the drugs away, you'd still get as much muscle as you can build without drugs, and you'd get as lean as you can get without drugs.
Yep.
So
I think also the learnings from the bodybuilders, they also made a lot of mistakes that I think then if you talk to bodybuilders who were sort of 1990s back in the day of like the massive bulk up, the famous Lee Priest photo with him with the box of donuts sitting on the gut eating a donut. I think if you talk to a lot of bodybuilders who were, in their primes in the 90s, they would probably be like, yeah, I wouldn't do the bulk again. Right. So but that's the beauty of trial and error. It doesn't always work, but it's the cool ability to look back at it and be like, I didn't see a lot of mass gain and it made it even harder to get ready for contest. I wouldn't do it again. And so that sort of learning, again, we build off of, but rather than just finding a random paper or waiting for a talking head to say that exact thing, it's kind of cool to talk to people who lived that experience.
Yeah, I think one of the things that your modern credentialed talking head, let's say, doesn't want to agree with something. If you watch an old video, like Brad said, of Lee Haney or somebody from 30, 40 years ago who obviously got in really good shape, they might not know the mechanism of exactly why what they were doing worked, but it just worked. So if you watch a video, he might say something that sounds a little rudimentary and probably not exactly how carbs work with muscle growth, or not exactly
right, but
not exactly how when you eat more protein, exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
But it still worked. And it doesn't matter if he didn't quite understand the physiology, because at the time, almost probably nobody really understood it. So they tried to figure out a way to explain it. But again, it doesn't matter. But I think these credentialed talking heads now can only bring themselves to say it because they're like, okay, so now I can at least scientifically prove what worked 40 years ago. Yeah, baby in the bathwater. And so kind of ignore it. Couldn't have been that. Just had to be the drugs. Those people aren't worth listening to. Yeah. And now they're re-arriving at, there's a paper saying that exactly works exactly that
If you got a bacterial infection, and I was like, John, you need to take this antibiotic. And you're like, well, what's it do? And I'm like, oh, it aligns your humors. And then you're like, I'm not taking that drug. That's stupid. But even though thousands of people have taken this drug and it's helped with the bacterial infection you have, because I got the explanation mechanism wrong, the drug must be useless. And it's that sort of thing going on. You start ignoring the results when the mechanism it sounds dumb to you or doesn't make sense. I feel like we did a lot of that as well with the bodybuilders.
Oh yeah. Well, and I just had someone mention recently, they were successfully losing weight using, I think a one meal a day type of pattern, or backloading their calories towards the end of the day, and just having a protein shake, just something simple in the morning. It wasn't all that fancy.
Basically, type of thing.
Yeah, basically amounts to like the Slim Fast pattern.
Yeah,
and it was working well. And then some people convinced her that was unhealthy, so she stopped doing it and started realizing, oh, I'm not getting my results anymore. And I thought, why would you stop? It was working. So it's so easy to have someone talk you out of something that's actually working if they sound intelligent enough with their explanation as to why you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. And you can actually convince somebody in the middle of getting results, oh, what you're doing is not good for the results you're actually seeing. And then they stop, which is, it's crazy to me. It still happens, but I guess it's something to do with, if you're going to go, I think it's something to do with people who are information seeking. So if you're here listening or watching, you're probably the type that is looking for diet and fitness information to better your understanding of what's the best thing to do for you and your goals. Yeah. And if you're actually getting a result doing whatever it is you're doing with your current level of information, and then by the end of the week, you've added 5 more hours of absorbing information and you convince yourself what you're doing is probably not the right thing, and then you stop it. What on earth are you doing if you were already getting results? Like, there's a limit to the amount of information that's ever going to help you out. And the experiential part of trying something and doing it is way, way more important than just piling in more and more information.
Yeah, it's that whole, I think the older golden age bodybuilders, I guess we'll call them, were much more concerned with if it worked than why it worked, right? And that's an interesting, well, probably a much more efficient and practical approach to take. Like, does this work, as opposed to, well, okay, why does it work? And we can spend, to your point, 5-6 hours on YouTube trying to figure out why it works, but it takes an hour in the gym to figure out if it works, sort of thing. So
right.
Yeah.
And I think maybe some of that information seeking is to find out something that could work better.
And that's the other thing. Yeah, it's always, hey, this routine is fantastic. It worked. I put on 8 pounds. My bench has gone up. And you're like, awesome. Now, how could I change it? And that is what's going on right now in social media, and even with the talking heads, et cetera, is taking something that's perfectly useful, the time tested, true, and effective, and be like, how can I just make it? I put my personal stamp on it. Just make it a bit better, right? And I think a lot of that's going on as well.
I wonder if it's people that don't want to accept how slow results actually are, or is it people who've been at it for a while and kind of tried a lot of things and maybe don't understand, speaking about guys specifically building muscle, maybe they can't accept or don't understand they're actually approaching their genetic max and there really isn't that much more muscle to really build.
See, I wonder if it's more just people wanting to exert their authority or expertise. I mean, I've talked about this a lot, but online you have a collection of talking heads, and the way they view the value is they make money, which is cool. Then there's another group who sort of knock down the ones who do it for money, but you're still there collecting not just the likes of social media, but the attention you're getting from being right. I'm right. People who think I'm smart and right. And they're the ones who I think also, as much as they, knock down everyone else who's in it for the money, they have their own way. They're monetizing it with this whole, like, I'm an authority, I'm right about everything. So it'd be very difficult to be, hey, I found an old bodybuilder who said this and it's right. It's better to be like, I found something and I've made it better. I think that's happening a lot too.
Okay, so that's from the credentialed talking head, right?
Yes.
Standpoint.
Yeah,
so
or even pseudo-credentialed. Yeah.
Right, but I'm talking about the person who listens to them and stops doing what was working.
Oh.
And moves on to something much more complicated, but it sounds more sophisticated because
I think that's fear a lot. Like, sometimes it's because it's promised to be faster, but it's like the person you're talking about didn't switch off of 2 shakes and a meal per day because someone told them something would work even better. They stopped because someone told them, "Ooh, it's bad for you." I think it's the fear mongering that really gets people off of things.
Oh.
Sometimes it's the efficiency, but even people who move from high volume weight training to like really low volume weight training, rarely is it because, well, I just get the exact same results, but from using less time. It's always like, oh, I don't want to spike my cortisol too much, and then you can actually lose muscle because of the hypercatabolic state. They have some sort of fear-based reasoning behind it. That's my guess. Yeah,
I think maybe it's fear of doing something wrong. So even though you're getting results, you sabotage it by listening to somebody who suggests the way you're getting the results is actually bad for your health.
Well, you're getting good results, but what about the really bad results you're also getting you just don't know about? Like that sort of thing. You're like, what bad results I'm getting that I don't know about? You're like, well, how do you feel right now? I'm like, oh, I feel amazing. Really? With your cortisol that high, I'm surprised. You should be feeling really tired, right? Like that sort of fear mongering. You're like, oh, geez, okay, I'm going to back off this stuff. So
what would happen if you're getting really good results and then you just never go online and you never had anyone talk you out of it?
Oh, you're a Nike bodybuilder.
Then you'd just be in really good shape and you'd have a pretty simple routine and you'd just follow your same routine.
Yep. So for you saw someone getting better results and then you try to figure out what they were doing,
right?
And then you'd apply what you can and throw out which is not useful.
One of my other thoughts is maybe it could be you don't even buy the idea that somebody could just be frustrated that they're not getting any further, and what they don't understand is they're kind of close to their max and there is no more. There's no more to go. Like
we're not all hyper responders.
Well, or whatever degree response you can get, it's like I can never get as strong as Brad on bench press. There's nothing I can do to get there, pound for pound or absolute. There's just nothing I can do. It's silly for me to go online and consume podcasts and read books and figure it out. I just can't do it. Like
you need magic shoulders.
I need magic shoulders. Whatever it is, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I would need to accept the fact that, okay, that's whatever. That's just one thing I'm not going to do. And there's nothing I can do, nothing I can read. I'm never going to get the combination of things that I've done wrong and solve it and get the combination of things I can do right to catch up to his degree of strength or be in that category of strength. I just can't do it. So it could be that. That's one thing I'm thinking is you don't realize how far your body can go as far as conditioning, body composition, muscle gain, maybe even strength. You may already be there. For some people listening who it's been years and years and you're kind of wondering like why you're stagnating, you're probably already there. Or the next few pounds of muscle gain or the next little bit of improvement is so exponentially harder to get or takes up so much more effort. You'd have to really overhaul your life to squeeze that little bit more muscle out of your body. It's like not even worth it. But that desire could lead you to going down rabbit holes that get you to undo what's already working. That's my one thought. It could be that is some people that are up against their limit. And my other thought is people who maybe haven't been honest with themselves. They really just don't want to put the effort in for how hard it really is going to be and how it's the mundane consistency that gets you there. And you're looking for the quick way around it. What's the clever way to get this done?
Oh, good word. Yeah. Try to clever their way.
And credentialed people are clever, right? And they've got the science to back them up, right? So if they can come up with the 3 45-minute workouts that do better than
they are very big brained. Yeah.
Just grinding it out and spending the amount of time that all of these other people got in shape doing it this way. But you're going to be the guy who solves it by listening to some talking heads who they themselves aren't even in the shape you want. That's the other thing I completely don't understand is listening to the quote unquote credentialed talking heads who haven't even walked the walk. So why would you even they're missing the part of applying what they're talking about.
It would be,
I would to see if it was even worth it.
I would accept it if not just their lab experience would have to be the equivalent of, the D1 football team was the subjects, so at least they had a very, very hands-on, I don't look the part, but everyone I work with did. Like that would make me feel a bit better. But when you know that that's not the case either, it is difficult. And the problem is you imagine, when someone starts talking about muscle gain or fat loss and you're reading it or watching it, you put it in the context in your head of what's familiar to you. So you just assume they're all, for me, 47-year-old guys who are in pretty decent shape, but they got a bit more decent shape doing this thing. So I should try it too, right? And you don't realize that wasn't the case at all. But yeah, I see your point there that it's nice to know they've maybe had a similar experience in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we probably need to wrap this one up. I guess the take-home message is if you're getting a result, don't stop what you're doing. Just continue getting the result and don't overthink it. Like the process of getting in shape, stripping, which usually we're talking about stripping off body fat and gaining muscle mass. That process, we've known about how to do that for a long, long time. It's pretty simple. It doesn't require you doing any more reading. It's the one way to think of it, it's the mundane consistency that produces the exceptional results.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I guess I want to end it with if you're not familiar with some of the late 1960s, 1970s bodybuilders and bodybuilding coaches, they're fascinating stories. It's worth looking into their approaches and what they thought and how they approached bodybuilding.
Yeah, and you'll find out that now they're just re-arriving at the same thing, but with a paper to back it up.
Yeah, a different mechanism, maybe type of thing. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think it's a good place to wrap it up for today. Absolutely. Oh, by the way, if this has happened, anyone listening, if this has happened to you, you've had a situation where you were getting results, you went down a rabbit hole, you undid some of what you already knew, and now you're just questioning what you should do. Like, put it in. Let us know in the comments. Like, let us know how you've navigated this. If you've gotten off track and got back on track. Actually, more importantly, have you strayed and come back, or any of this stuff? Just let us know if you've had any stories that if this is resonating. Let us know your story as well in the comments. All right, so let's leave it there for today. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barber, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.